Hey,
Hey
everybody.
there.
Welcome, welcome. Thrilled to have you here, replay viewers. I'm excited to continue the journey of recording live on the Schmooze interviews. This will be rebroadcast as part of my podcast in January, but stick around for a great interview. Let me tell you who we have today as our guest. Today's guest helps launch new companies, create new brands, and refresh existing identities by bringing strategic expertise to design and marketing. Her studio, Agency Bell, helps companies launch and grow by creating their identities from strategy to logos, websites, and social media. She is known for coining the concept of conscious branding, helping her clients succeed by focusing on being responsive and responsible to their customers and communities. She's worked with both Fortune 50 companies and startups. She served 10 years on the Boston Board of Directors at AIGA and Professional Design Organization, and currently serves as the executive officer of the board for the New Art Center and as the marketing chair for a national health advocacy organization. Please join me in welcoming Laura Sauter.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
Laura, I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining us from the Boston area. I know where you are in Milton. You're not far from the chocolate factory
Just
buildings.
down
I had
just
friends who
down the
lived over
street.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. I lived in Boston for 20 years, so it's always fun to talk to someone from that area. You're on a show that is all about building strong networks, but the context is leadership. So, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Thanks for that question. So I was a natural born leader. Sixth grade, I would say, I joined student government. I was the vice president of student government. My president was Nora Daly. She was the mayor's child. So I was in leadership with the mayor's daughter. I've just always plugged in, and that's really what I would call leadership, is just really plugging in. It really wasn't in order to look good or feel good. It just, I wanted to be involved. I wanted to take part, join forces, kind of be at the source of the action, if you will, and not be on the sidelines. I love to play. I love to connect. And leadership for me is really that connection between playing, which is engaging, and bringing things forward, like not just being on the stands, but like being in the game. So, I mean, I've just always been, even as a child, parts of the clubs, the French club or whatnot, and just always joined the group that was making that club happen. So, I mean, even you mentioned the boards. I mean, I don't just join the boards. I'm always like on the executive team. I just you're a networking podcast, so I'm part of a networking group. The first role I got was as the president. So it just doesn't it comes easily to me. I like it, and I feel like I'm more successful when I'm at the leadership helm of whatever it is that I'm doing.
It's fascinating to hear that you've always been in that way. That even way back in sixth grade, there you were, and if not for the mayor's daughter, you may have actually been president.
Maybe.
There was some name
I
recognition there
yeah, yeah.
you were fighting
Uh,
against.
I know she was a strong little thing. Yeah, she sixth grade. She knew how to stand proud and lead for sure. I learned a lot from her actually. I don't know what she's doing. Maybe she's like a
We'll find
senator,
out. Now,
a
now we'll find
senator.
out. Yeah, that's right. We'll definitely do some research. So listen, I think what's cool is that there's some evidence of you early on stepping up, not just to sort of be a joiner, but to join and lead in an organization. And you're talking about how it feels comfortable, it feels right. You're your best self if you're part of the group that is really making things happen, like keeping
Right.
things going. I'm curious how that came to be. I mean, understanding, we can kind of look at the mayor's daughter and think, oh, they must have a home life or witness like what their parent did to like achieve. And so that could have set for an environment. So what was the environment you had that was putting, you in a place where in grade school, in grammar school, here you are, looking for these opportunities, or opportunities are being handed to you, or teachers are seeing you and saying, go do this thing. Like, who was the inspiration for you, or who saw that potential in you?
So I had a very powerful mom. I was raised by a single mom. And I obviously didn't know all these stories when I was young, but I mean, she did things that most women of that day did not do. I mean, she bought a house. She went back to work. Most women, when they had their child, didn't go back to work. So when she used to work for the University of Chicago. And so she came back with a baby. They said, oh, I'm so happy for you. You have a new baby, have a good life. She's like, no, I'm still going here. Like, don't, you have to take me back. And she's like, I'm head of household. So, she was a very strong, independent go-getter. But I think mostly because I was an only child. Like, I was an only child. I had a great home life, but like I wanted to get out and like do stuff and be with people and connect with people. And I wasn't, content just being on the sidelines, as I mentioned. I wanted to be in the mix. And I think really because I was I was that one little egg in the basket. I wanted to get out and mix.
Yeah, and you clearly sought out the opportunities. You had someone who was not holding you back, because you had a parent who was leading by example, even though you didn't know the stories at the time.
Yeah.
Clearly, she had a belief in herself. She wanted you to have that belief in yourself.
Right.
And that's really cool. And clearly, those early forays into leadership went well enough that it
Right.
didn't burn you out on the idea of doing it. Because I think that's the other thing is, if you're young and you try something a little out of your comfort zone, and it doesn't go so well, but like for you, it went well enough that you sought out more opportunities. And did you mention that you ran for other offices in later in high school as well?
So I was part of clubs. I think, really where things really started getting interesting was our high school had our last semester of senior year, we could do what's called a May project. And we could, join with a company or an organization that was kind of in the vein of where we wanted to go professionally in our future. And so I opened up the phone book, which that's what we had in those days. And my sixth grade English teacher said I'd be really good at advertising. So I opened up the A's, I looked through advertising, and I called the phone number that was the biggest ad in the phone book. And I called J. Walter Thompson. And so that's a very large multinational ad agency. I called, a gentleman answered. I said, I am Laura, at the time Stryker of the University of Chicago High School, and I'm looking for an internship. And this gentleman said, oh, let me connect you with HR. And I said, thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. And here I am. I get the internship. I take the Jeffrey Express up Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And I'm like, 900 Michigan Avenue. Oh, it's the John Hancock building where they had 12 floors. And little did I know, as this 18-year-old, I had an internship with this amazing organization, multinational, and of course, got many connections. And so I just kept doing that in college. Every summer, I interned in Paris, Seattle, New York City, and I just did the do. I wrote the letter. I got internships with, magazines in New York and design agencies in Paris. And, I just didn't think it didn't even occur to me that I couldn't do it. I just did it.
How many times did you get rejected in the process of reaching out? I mean, like that first one happened,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And I kind of want to circle back on that. But when you were doing subsequent summers, how much work did you have to put into it?
The Paris one was the last summer of college, and that one I probably got the most no's from. Some of it was a language barrier. Even though I speak French, I wrote like, every design firm in the city, and some of them were like automotive design or like, industrial design or something that had nothing to do with the type of design I do, which is graphic design. And so they were very polite. They all wrote me letters. They were so they were so thrilled that this, young person in America wanted to work for them. And, the one I got, was perfect. I mean, it was, but I had a stack of thank yous, but no thank yous for sure.
Wow. I mean, there's so much to like glean from this for our listeners about um, can do, believe in yourself, perseverance. I mean, no holds barred. I mean, I don't know. There's like all these cliches coming into my head when I think
Yeah,
about it. Whereas, I mean, in some ways, the naiveness you had at 18 is something that helped you. I had an interesting experience in grad school. I had to find an internship, and I didn't want any of the ones that were my first year. I did the one that was in the book. You know, they had a whole book full of them. And the
yeah,
second year, I knew I didn't want to do any of those. So I spent a lot of time trying to line up my own. And they basically said, if you can't find one by this date, you're gonna have to pick something from the book. And I got invited to be the New York State coordinator of a national campaign because the person who was going to have that role became the national coordinator, and the organization didn't have funds for someone to come in. And and I had sort of poked my head so many times like into their worlds that my name, my business card was coming out of everyone's pocket. My handmade, printed on dot matrix on construction paper and cut out with scissors business cards, I might tell you.
I love
um,
it.
and I didn't know what I was walking into. At the end of that year, my boss in that role said I would never have taken the role on myself. Like the
That's so
politics,
great.
the personalities, but when you don't know and you just throw yourself in, I mean, you kind of can get really far because you're not jaded about how life works. But by the
Yeah,
time you get into your third and fourth year of trying to reach out, I think you now have a different understanding of what's needed. But you did it, and you built yourself, designed yourself a world's like a worldly experience every year
absolutely.
of college. Which, I mean, I don't know if I've met anyone who's done that unless it
It's
was built in. Like Northeastern University in Boston has that
totally.
built in, but for you to kind of craft it yourself at that age is tells a lot about who you are, and that you were interested enough to pursue that. Did you discover along the way things you didn't want to do because you had been exposed to certain careers or opportunities, and you're like, oh, that's not what I thought it was? Did it help you sort of say no to some things going forward?
Um, yes and no. I mean, I definitely loved all of my internships. The Seattle internship was with a sports magazine or a sports company. They made all of the posters that are for all of like the NFL and the baseball league, etc. Um, but they also had a magazine called Sports Washington and did a lot of work with the University of Washington State. So I mean, I'm not really a sports person, so sorry everybody, but I'm not a sports person. But I learned a lot, and it was definitely I learned a lot because also the people who worked there were sports people. So I just learned about a whole nother demographic of individuals, and that was very interesting. I got to test out like like different geographic areas, which was interesting. Like Seattle and New York are very, very different, and they both like appealed to me. And so really I had such a difficult time picking between Seattle and New York. And even the morning that I moved to New York City, I was like, oh, I'm moving to the wrong city. But they both, for very different reasons called to me. And um, I think it's really good for people to do internships in different areas. I have a senior in college daughter, and she's doing an internship literally down the street for her, from her university. I think it's good to like break away and go somewhere. So try out different things, learn about a different type of person, different culture perhaps, or different type of community. It's not just the job; it's also the culture that I think is so interesting. But
Yeah. Yeah, most people, if they leave their hometown, it's because they went away to college and then they moved to that area
yeah,
of where
and
the
just
college is, because that's the only other thing they know, and it
right.
was better than home for whatever reason.
Yeah,
But
but then they come back.
yeah, so for you to have experience living for a while in these different places, I think you're right. It adds a depth to your understanding of how the world works, that there are so many different kinds of people in the world. Some people are less like you.
Right.
You might like the work, but not like the kind of people you work with, or you might,
Exactly.
like the people, and it's like not quite the right work. When you were
Yeah.
12, did you have the clarity at 12 years old of the work you wanted to be doing, or did that sort of happen a little later into college or into high
Um,
school?
so I mentioned I went to the University of Chicago lab school. This is a very like, science driven college prep school community. Long story short, I was the artsy fartsy one, so I went to school with people who were studying like quasars, and I was like, let's draw, let's paint. So I knew I was different, and I didn't really know what to do with that. And thankfully, as I mentioned, my sixth grade English teacher, she's like, you're really, really, really good with words, but you have that unique quality where you're really good at visuals and words, and you should consider advertising, which of course I didn't know what that was. Later in high school, I started doing commercials, and I was behind the scenes. And so I would do the bite and smile. They're taking video and pictures of me, Sarah Lee, Captain Crunch, Domino's Pizza. Like I did commercials. So I got to know about advertising from that angle, and then of course, pursued the marketing side of things, and found my home, because I really during high school I was a good student, but I just didn't gravitate towards math and science the way I did towards the visual arts, for sure.
Yeah, and the world was evolving very quickly, what
That's
that
true.
even meant, right? Because
Right.
advertising was changing dramatically, like, every 5 years, what was measured, what was a metric, what mediums were possible. I mean, you're really coming into it, at a really interesting inflection point, I think, in advertising as well.
Absolutely.
Was
I
it
mean,
focused on a job? Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
well, very quickly, like my age is very interesting. So in 1993, when I graduated from college, that's when Wired magazine came out. So every internship that I had, like for example, I mentioned New York City and the magazine that I interned for, they were leaving traditional paste up and going to the computers, but they didn't know how to use the computers. So here was this young person, Laura, who knew the computers, even though we weren't even officially being taught that at school, because it just wasn't formed enough. So every time I had an internship, they were making these big changes for them in their technology. And even in my first job, I worked for Town and Country magazine, and I was in charge of production, and they still did separations. We were talking about color correction with a marker on a digital proof, not even a digital proof, a layered proof. I forget what they're called, not ruby lith. Anyway, and you're saying, bring in a little bit of the magenta in her cheeks, lower the cyan in the shadow. I mean, you're handwriting all these changes, whereas now it's like Photoshop and it takes 2 seconds. So I mean, this was the day I was growing up in.
Yeah, and you are on the forefront of that, so you're also getting a chance to learn it and specialize in a way, because you're new, you're eager, you're not like stuck in the way things always have been. There's an openness. I think the timing of you emerging into this career path is very interesting. Others might not have seen it though. I mean, I think that it has to do with sort of who you've always been,
Right.
seeking out opportunities to step forward into some sort of leadership role, which could be a formal role, or it could just be like, oh, sure, I'll take that on. Did you know going into college, like you started figuring out this advertising path? Is that actually what you did? Did you go into advertising out of
I,
college and have like a job and focus on a career?
I did. So I did apply to art school, but both of my parents were academics, and I felt like I needed a liberal arts, experience. So I went to University of Wisconsin and had a general ed, but then I specialized in art. So my degree is in graphic design, but with the graphic design degree, I wasn't doing all that important strategic thinking that I wanted to be doing. So I did a dual degree with journalism, and journalism wasn't very creative. My creative degree was obviously very creative, but they didn't have the thinking component. And I think today's programs are way smarter, but in my day, it was either just the visual arts or journalism. And I, as loved the idea of working in magazines, and that was my first job, was in magazines. So I really truly combined journalism and art, and that was my first few years of post grad work.
So at some point you decide that the security or relative assumed security of having a JOB, which I think as the mergers and acquisitions world has happened in the recession, we're all like, oh, they're not as secure as we thought. But you decide to start doing something entrepreneurial. And in some ways, this doesn't surprise me because you're being very entrepreneurial even within a job setting.
Right.
Did this start out as a side hustle? Did you know other entrepreneurs? Like, how you find those first few people to pay you? Like, what were the beginning roots
Oh God.
of you creating your own thing?
I love this question. So I was a reluctant entrepreneur for sure. And here's the story. So I was living in Michigan. I was a creative director of Borders Books when they were around. And so I had a very big job. I had a staff. I had, 1,200 stores nationwide. And then I had a baby, and my ex-husband my now ex-husband, he got a new job in Massachusetts. So here I am with a 14-week-old baby, and I live in Massachusetts. Around this time, September 11th happened. So my inclination was to go from one big job to the next big job, and I was interviewing at Putnam Investments. I got an opportunity for, I don't know, an art director job there. And September 11th happened. That organization lost, unfortunately, a lot of lives, and they just put a hiring freeze on all roles. And so I had no job. I had an au pair moving here from Sweden to take care of my children or child. And I was like, okay, Laura, you're creative. Let's do this. And I started my own business. And I started it in suburban Boston, didn't know anyone. And so what I did was I joined the board of the American Institute of Graphic Arts and started to hobnob and make connections. I was, on their website as a leader in Boston in design. And so that really helped me. It grounded me. It gave me a home of other professionals. And what I did was, we did not have at the time a professional development curriculum through AIGA. So I started that. And so I was teaching through the speakers I was bringing in. I was teaching other small business owners how to do a better job being a small business owner. And of course, I chose every topic that I needed to know because I knew nothing about running my own business. I learned about starting, making your own marketing plan. I did workshops on all these types of things that benefited, obviously, many people, but also benefited me. So I did that for 9 years. And so that was the first 9 years of my business.
Okay, we got to pause there just because there are some amazing takeaways in what you just said. I mean, first of all, there's the back up against the wall, need to do something. Okay, fine, I will try something on my own moment. That I think a lot of entrepreneurs are born of that moment, of that desperation of being laid off or of a recession. And I've met so many people who like their business really started during a downturn in the economy. We just saw in the middle of the pandemic, like so many people who focus on building businesses. So there's that sort of story arc, but then your decision to join an organization, and not just join because you're Laura, but to figure out and actually create your own leadership role that, as you said, benefited a lot of people, but specifically gave you the kind of business education you were lacking, but
Yep.
also put you in touch with amazing content creators and producers and speakers and experts in their fields who are now,
My
they're your
buddies.
friends, they're your relationships, not just with the
Yeah.
organization. I always joke that people don't grasp the benefit of being the person who drives someone to or from an airport when there's
Yep.
an external outside speaker. Like, be the first person to say, no, I don't care what time it is. I'll do that, because you're going to get all that extra time in the car with that person. If you do it right, that's going to be a good start to a great relationship. So it sounds like you were sort of taking advantage of that opportunity. And so, I mean, it's such a smart networking move for people who are like, well, I'm starting from scratch. I mean, literally, you're like in the middle of a new community. You have no local network. Virtual and online networking isn't really a thing.
Not at all. Right.
Like, what are you going to do? It's not like you can take off to another internship in some far off place. You got a kid, you have to be stable in your environment, you know? So you
Exactly.
went to the organization. So that's just awesome. I needed to underscore that.
Thank you.
So, what kind of clients and what kind of service did you initially provide? Like when you were, because you had experienced a lot of different work over your career by that point. How did
Right.
you decide this is the thing I'm going to really put forward as the thing I sell?
It was pretty easy because I had just come from I was a creative director for 2 years, but before that, I was a big agency person. So I was in New York City. I had done global campaigns. So here I am, I'm going on my own. And I really considered myself like, an agency, even though it was just one person, definitely not a freelancer. That was a big no word for me. I was never, and I never have I ever been a freelancer. I have always been a agency, even though it's just me. I am an agency. So there was that kind of belief system of like, I'm not a freelancer, I'm an agency consultant. And so I considered myself, I did a whole exercise on who I was, who I wasn't. And I came up with like this visual of like Mighty Mouse, like, okay, I'm not the biggest, but I am exactly like them because I have been them, literally 2 years before I was them. And I had obviously lower costs. I worked for myself. I had a very nice home at the time. So I worked out of a bedroom of my home, but it was very professional. And so, I did what the agency that I had come from did. I did brand strategy and brand design, and it was just those two things. So helping companies be clear on who they were, who they weren't, and where they were going, usually companies in transition, and then fulfilling on whatever that design need was, whether it be a new logo or a new website or an advertising campaign or whatever it is that our challenge was. But it was brand strategy and brand design. And that's it.
And those early clients, did they come from your existing network? Was it people you previously worked with? Was it new people? Like, how did you find the first people who understood your vision?
Sure. It was a collection of that. So I had, thankfully, a couple of clients from my New York days. One was a furniture manufacturer. Another one was in the financial services realm. I had, through my ex-husband, I had new connections in the biotech world because obviously Boston's very strong in financial services and biotech. And so through his industry contacts, I made some new really good contacts, and that really helped me a lot. So I got a couple of biopharmaceutical clients that way. And then also the good old fashioned way, like I was getting my hair done at the local salon. I said, listen, do you guys need to do advertising? And literally I did their photography, their design, all their advertising placement in, Boston newspapers and periodicals. And I had small business owner clients in those days, and then I had like Biogen. So
Yeah.
it was very different. Like the types of clients were very different at the time. They're much more niche now.
That's actually what I wanted to ask you, is how has that changed? Because it sounds like service-wise, you're providing very similar things still, like brand awareness, brand design, and then the implementation of what that campaign is, like the material pieces of that. But it's sounding like you maybe are a little more focused on the who.
Yeah, I think I am. I mean, have I, taken others? Of course. But what really excites me are two kind of general areas. One is health and home. So health still can include, the biotechs, but it can also be, an organic food company, a yoga studio. It's a little broader. And then the home, I've always enjoyed the home connection. So I worked for House Beautiful. I worked for Town and Country. I've early in my business, I collected many clients who were in like, lighting design, rug design, aspects of the home. And so I really understand how to market to people in that way. That has continued into the service providers, so architects, interior designers, fine home builders. So health and home, those are the
Mhm.
two kind of buckets that I serve.
It sounds like you've also early on when you were trying to figure out like, who you were and who you were not, and as you've refined, you're very reflective about like self-reflective about the business that you're creating and the opportunities you're seeking, and that you've used that to sort of navigate forward. You've also really leaned heavily, it sounds like, into your network, and that's something that I'm always keenly interested in. Like, how does the network help you at these different stages? I mean, obviously, early on, the challenge is just finding businesses and getting your business set up, and you solve that by creating a series that would help you and help others. As you think about your network, there's like the inner circle, the people that you know you're gonna stay in touch with or catch back up with ease. But then there's like the second and third tier or second and third layers out, the people that you might see once a year at a conference, or you worked with them 5 years ago, but you haven't had a reason to since. I should mention you like these people, they like you. How do you think about nurturing and sustaining those kinds of weaker connections? Is there anything, any habits, philosophies, practices?
Um, all of the above. So early in my practice, I had what I coined or considered like the power of 10. So I'd make 10 outreach calls or connections a day. Some of them might be new. Some of them might be, oh, we met at the conference last year. How are you doing? Or one of those influencers from my professional development series. Hey, I noticed you wrote a new book. Tell me more about it. And then obviously, hopefully talking more about potential other business leads, et cetera. I've always been very relationship driven, and I never got trained in sales. So my sales approach has always been super soft and very relationship driven. I fall in love with my clients. I think my clients fall in love with me. And so, even if we are have rolled off of a project, because what I do is sometimes, especially in the beginning, I built a brand. Now they're off and running. See you later. But I'll call in a year. How's it going? Tell me more about how the brand has been doing for you. I love catching up with people, and so that's never been a challenge. In the earlier days of my business, I myself became a single mom. And so I didn't feel that spaciousness of like a lot of evening networking or the BNIs or that type of thing. I didn't feel like I could fulfill on those commitments. But now years later, I am a major go-getter in terms of networking. I did join a BNI. I took that very seriously, and other networking groups as well, just to really be connected. Women's conferences, other professional conferences. I'm always kind of connecting with people.
I mean, the 10 a day thing that you started with, that's an interesting thing because you actually said call. Did you
Right.
mean actually a phone call? Because, and I'm assuming so because the timing of when you're saying this, but like I think that most people even today are like reluctant to just randomly calling people. But you had the time, so you're like, this is how I'm going to get my name out there, right? Like
Yeah.
you're going to be proactive about getting into conversations with people, like you said, building the relationship, seeing how you can support people, letting them know you saw the thing that happened or you heard about their book, and then part of that was also constraints around your time,
Right.
being a single mom, but now you're able to be more engaged, taking advantage. I mean, it sounds like you're really thoughtful about professional development and how those professional development opportunities are also networking opportunities. Like you're somehow double wins for those kinds of engagements.
Absolutely. I think um, I think professional and personal development are so important. One of the things that has made me so comfortable is mindfulness, and really trying to work through any of those insecurities, because as you mentioned, a lot of my early success was my naivete, and now I'm a lot older than 18, and I have to kind of remind myself I can do it sometimes. And so by being grounded, by being really in my body, confident, doing some either whether they be mantras or possibilities or whatever. I mean, just like reminding myself I can do it. And sometimes calling people is hard, especially if it's a lead or something that's not a certainty. Like, why do they want to hear from me? Well, why not? Why wouldn't they want to hear from me? And kind of turn it around. Like, I might make their day.
I love that. That is a really positive affirmations, mindset shift to have. And a lot of us talk ourselves out of any kind of opportunity because we don't even take it. We just sort of walk away from it. And that's, I always say, like, if you overthink what to say when you're gonna go say hello to someone in a room, and you're like, but I can't remember exactly how I know them. Am I thanking them, congratulating them? Like, why are they look familiar to me? The worst opening line is the one you don't get to take, because by the time you figure it out, you look up, that person's no longer there.
Right.
Right. Like that's the complete miss. And so for you to sort of psych yourself up a little bit into, not only can you do it, but you have a history of doing it.
Right.
It gets easier also as you get older. It's no longer naivete. It's not based on reality.
Right.
You've had a lot of swings at bat. I'm not a sports person either,
but I get it.
a lot of them have connected. Like, you've done well, often enough to keep going and trying out those methods. And you're also willing to try slightly different methods, not be stuck on something. I think there's a nimbleness to how you sort of move through the world, react to the world, but you're also incredibly proactive, and not surprising. You're doing really well with what you're doing today. I would love to hear, this is like my wrap up question. It's one of my favorite questions. So Laura, I know you and I are going to stay connected, and you're doing such cool things in the world that when I see you a year from now, and I realize it's been a year since you and I have had this conversation, I'm going to ask you, hey, what's been going on? What are you celebrating? That's what I want to know. What are you going to share with me? What's the big news of a year from now? What are you most looking forward to?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I started writing a book. So I will be telling you that I successfully published my book, and I'm, on the stage talking about my new book. So that's exactly what I'll be saying a year from now.
Are you willing to say a little more about what the book is about?
Yeah, it's if you've heard of StoryCorps from NPR, it's stories about food and why we cook the way we cook, and those love stories that are passed down from generation to generation, and really just about the the love of cooking, people who just find joy in cooking and what that means for them and how they share it.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to celebrate that with you. It sounds like an incredible book to share with the world. It's a hopeful book. It's an inspiring book. That's a yummy book. That's another word they're thinking about. That's awesome. Well, I can't wait for all that to happen. How can people find you and follow your work?
So I have a website, and it's my name, Agency Bell. So Agency Bell has only one L.com, and then on social media at Agency Bell, one word. On Instagram, on LinkedIn, you can find me, Laura Sauter, and then my business page is linked there. Of course, on Facebook, but LinkedIn is a really good place, as well as my website.
Fantastic.
And I welcome connections. I love it.
Yeah,
people
please
reach out.
let people listening, let Laura know that you heard this interview and what sort of stood out for you, or that you want to get on her launch team for her book, which is going to be amazing. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Laura, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. This has been so wonderful. Thank you.